When your enemy admits you're hitting them that hard, you know it's hurting. If Putin's army behaves like this during a self-declared ceasefire, can we trust a word they say at the negotiating table? Ukraine has wrestled the initiative back from the Russians. It's meat grinder tactic after meat grinder tactic after meat grinder tactic, but it's something that at some stage will come back and bite Putin and bite him hard. As Putin loses his most powerful ally in Europe and Russia commits war crimes during the Easter truce, there are significant developments in Ukraine. I'm Philip Ingram. This is Battle Plans Exposed. Indicators and warnings are showing the battlefield is volatile, ruthless, and shifting by the hour. Ukraine's drone wall has reached a lethal critical mass and is driving staggering casualties for Putin. Russia is losing 316 soldiers per square kilometre and still can't seize the Donetsk region. At current rates, analysts estimate it would take until June 2030 just to capture the remainder of the four regions Putin already claims. Those are Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia. To seize all of Ukraine, another 103 years. That's not months, that's years. 103 years. Following the democratic and peaceful ousting of Viktor Orban in Hungary, the Kremlin is finding itself more isolated than ever. Putin's veto on the world stage is crumbling just as his front lines face their most lethal tests yet. And Putin's front line in the EU has crumbled with that Hungarian election. We look at all of this, plus Ukraine's deep strikes on Russia's war machine and Putin's hybrid war that's heating up in Europe. But first, let's take a look at what's been happening on the front lines. So we'll start with this shocking moment where Russian troops kill their own plainclothes soldiers on the front line. Russian FPV drones, those first-person view drones, struck the group near Chasiv Yar during the ceasefire, killing 3 soldiers, later identified as Russian troops, hit by their own side during an evacuation attempt. This blue on blue or red on red hit shows a military that has lost its grip on command and control even when they're the ones who are calling the truce. Now here we have an example of the devastating shift in drone warfare. The Dnipro Delta has become a graveyard for small Russian craft. A Russian infantry boat tried to slip through the reeds in the Kherson region, but they're being hunted by Ukraine's newest FPV variants, the Hornet drone. Watch the user interface on the screen here. It's equipped with an automated terminal guidance system. There's no outrunning this. Once it auto-locks onto its target and it is engaged, the drone's computer calculates the boat's speed instantly. Notice how the crosshair locks onto the boat even as the pilot faces electronic jamming or signal loss near the water's surface. The onboard AI then takes over. This is the terminal autonomy phase. Once the lock-on, electronic warfare becomes irrelevant. The drone is no longer a remote-controlled weapon, it's a self-guided missile, moving from human decision-making and putting AI behind the wheel. It's a surgical strike that removes human error entirely, but it removes the impact of electronic warfare entirely. High speed, high precision, and for the soldier that was on that boat, it was all over before he even heard the Hornet. Next up, we have signals that Russian recruits and soldiers are woefully unprepared and are lacking basic training or basic understanding of the modern battlefield that they're facing. We're seeing an uptick in FPV drone videos of entire groups of Russian infantry being eliminated. The reason? They're not following basic modern soldier skills and techniques. Maybe they haven't been taught them. Instead of splitting up and running for cover, they're gathering in large groups, making themselves easy targets. You can see their heat signature standing out here. That will attract the swarms of drones in to drop grenades on them. Look at the lack of spacing here. It's military 101, disperse or die. These Russian recruits are huddling together under fire, which is a natural human instinct, but a fatal military error. Even with the thermal cloaks, their invisibility cloaks, this isn't Harry Potter. Their behavior gives them away. They aren't reacting like soldiers, they're reacting like civilians in uniform. This is the result of a training pipeline that has completely collapsed under the pressure from frontline attrition. Now look at this. This isn't the Black Sea, this is the Caspian Sea. Ukrainian special forces have just struck Lukoil's Greyfer and Korshagin platforms nearly 1,000 kilometers from the front line. By taking the fight to the northern Caspian, Kyiv is proving that Russia's energy crown jewels are no longer out of reach. No matter how far east they are, or try to hide them, the Ukrainians will get them. And if you're wondering if we've seen this before, the answer is yes. This is the third major wave of strikes in the Caspian since December. Ukraine isn't just poking the bear, they're systematically deconstructing Lukoil's offshore footprint. They hit Filanovsky in December, 3 more in January, and now they're back for seconds at Greyfer and Korshagin. And finally, it's not just the front lines and deep strikes that are helping destabilize Putin's army. We've seen the drones and the missiles hitting the trenches and ports, but this is perhaps the most insidious threat to the Kremlin: internal sabotage. The Atesh partisan group took out this locomotive at the Lishoviskova station in Rostov. Why is this significant? Russia is running out of engines. By hitting the Lishoviskova rail hub, they have choked the main artery supplying the Zaporizhia front. You can have all the troops and tanks in the world, but if you can't move them to the front on your trains or resupply them with fuel or spare parts, your offensive actions are dead in their tracks. So let's start with a geopolitical earthquake in Hungary. After 16 years, Viktor Orban, the man who has spent the last 4 years acting as Putin's primary roadblock inside the European Union, is out. The landslide victory for Peter Magyar doesn't just change the map of Europe, it removes the political shield Putin relied on to block military aid and sanctions. Orban's exit likely unblocks the €90 billion loan for Ukraine via the EU. While Budapest prepares for a re-entry into the European fold, Putin is lashing out. He's lost his political leverage in the West, and as we saw over 48 hours, he is now doubling down on the one thing he has left: raw, unrestricted violence. That brings us to the so-called Easter ceasefire. Putin declared a unilateral 32-hour truce, but from the data from the Institute for the Study of War, it tells a very different story on the ground. The short-lived ceasefire was initially introduced by Putin to mark the Orthodox Easter, to which Ukraine agreed to adhere to. But Russia shamelessly broke the ceasefire 2,300 times in less than 24 hours, according to the Ukrainian army. Most disturbingly, while Moscow played the peace card for the international cameras, the Kremlin's forces shot dead 4 Ukrainian prisoners of war, despite promising to temporarily stop the fighting, Kyiv claimed. Harrowing footage shows the moments before the reported cold-blooded killing of the 4 prisoners near Veto in Kharkiv, in this region. It's a stark reminder that ceasefire is often just a tactical word for the Kremlin, not a moral one. Ukraine has opened an investigation into the alleged executions, which they say were clear war crimes. It seems the only thing that actually stopped was the long-range missile strikes, the first night of silence from Shahads and ballistic missiles we've seen in nearly a year. But on the front lines, the metal never stopped flying. There were 28 ground assaults and a swarm of over 700 Lancet and FPV drones. If Putin's army behaves like this during a self-declared ceasefire, can we trust a word they say at the negotiating table? In my extensive operational experience and from a military intelligence perspective, I've been subject to many ceasefires and peace agreements. And whilst you get the odd violation, over 100 in a short period of time is not a violation. It is a breakdown in command and control on the front line. It shows that frontline commanders do not have an understanding of what's going on. They cannot react to the orders and the instructions that are coming from the higher levels of command, and they don't have the discipline within their frontline troops to stop them firing at different opportunities. That is worrying, because if they don't have control over the troops that are operating in the front line, then they don't have control over the military operations that they're trying to plan. This is the Russians violating this. The Ukrainians, there have been no reports of them violating the ceasefires apart from to defend themselves. And therefore, we've got a disciplined force that is weaker on paper than the larger Russian force that is largely undisciplined. I know, as a betting man, which side I'd put my money on as to where this conflict is going to go. And it's not the Russians. Now let's look at two critical sectors where the front line is bending. According to the latest analysis from the Institute for the Study of War, we have a tale of two offensives. In the east, Ukrainian forces have launched successful biting counterattacks, advancing in the heavily fortified Konstantinivka-Druzhkivka tactical area in this area. But further south, Vladimir Putin's forces are relentlessly grinding forward, making fresh gains in the Alexandrivka direction. What does this mean for the war? Who is actually winning the tactical chess match? Let's start here in the heart of Donetsk. Konstantinivka and Druzhkivka, make no mistake, these aren't just towns, these are the logistical beating heart of Ukraine's defence in the east. They form part of the fortress belt. For months, Russian forces have tried to strangle these cities to collapse the Ukrainian line. But over the last 48 hours, the narrative here has flipped. Ukrainian forces haven't just held the line, they've pushed back. Geolocated footage analysed by the Institute for the Study of War confirms that Ukraine has successfully advanced in this tactical area. We're seeing confirmed Ukrainian strikes cleaning out Russian positions in eastern Konstantinivka and southern Drovobalka. And why is this important? Because defence in depth is about elasticity. Ukraine absorbed the Russian blows, weathering assaults near Pleshchivka and Ivanopilya, and then snapped back like a rubber band, catching Russian forward units off balance. How did they do it? Well, it comes down to massive technological edge that Ukraine has sharpened this winter. General Oleksandr Syrsky, the head of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, recently reported that Ukraine's newly formed unmanned systems forces are now flying over 11,000 combat missions a day. In March 2026 alone, they struck over 150,000 targets. In this specific Konstantinivka-Druzhkivka pocket, Ukraine's drone superiority is creating a dead zone for Russian armour. Russian mechanised units can't mass for a breakthrough without being spotted and annihilated from the sky. This has allowed Ukrainian infantry to counterattack and reclaim vital ground southwest of the city. But war is a pendulum, and while Ukraine is securing its fortress cities in Donetsk, the Russians are throwing immense weight in the Alexandrivka direction. The ISW confirms that Russian forces have recently advanced there. Geolocated footage from April the 10th shows Russian forces pushing south of Novohirovka, southeast of Alexandrivka, and this isn't a sophisticated lightning-fast blitzkrieg. This is the classic Russian meat grinder approach. We know from field intelligence that the Russian 656th Motorized Rifle Regiment is operating heavily in this sector. Their drone operators are attempting to match the Ukrainians, targeting Ukrainian defensive positions just north of Alexandrivka to soften them up for infantry assaults. What we are seeing here is the Russians' military willingness to absorb staggering casualties for incremental tactical gains, something we've seen across the whole of the front line for the past 4 years. By deploying the strategic reserves into this axis, the Kremlin is trying to force Ukraine's hand. They want General Syrsky to panic and pull his victorious troops out of Konstantinivka to plug the gaps down further south in Alexandrivka. It is a brutal, calculated game of attrition. To understand both of these movements, the Ukrainian success in the north and the Russian grinding advance in the south, we have to look at the weapons defining this spring 2026 campaign. We're officially in the era of true drone war. The Ukrainian arsenal, Ukraine has effectively achieved local drone superiority. That is a new term from local air superiority, but to do that, they have to control the air as well. Their mid-range strike campaigns are destroying Russian logistics before they even reach the front. The Russian response? Russia isn't standing still. They have expanded their own unmanned systems forces to over 101,000 personnel. On April the 12th alone, the Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russia launched nearly 750 Lancet and Molniya fixed-wing strikes. What the Institute for the Study of War data tells us is fascinating. Unverified reports suggest that even the Kremlin privately acknowledges Ukraine has the upper hand in frontline drone operations right now. Russia's Defense Minister, Andrei Belousov, has allegedly called the situation critical for Russian forces. This technological gap is exactly why Russia's advance in Alexandrivka is so slow and costly. Drones are the great equalizer, and right now, Ukraine is flying them better. So where does this leave us as we move deeper into the spring of 2026? The battlefield is fracturing into hyper-localized, intense tactical fights. Ukraine is proving that with technological superiority and disciplined defence, they can not only hold the line, but take ground back from the invaders, as we've seen in Konstantinivka and Druzhkivka. But Russia's sheer mass cannot be ignored. Their advances near Alexandrivka prove that Putin is still willing to feed his strategic reserves into the meat grinder to keep the pressure on Kyiv. The question for the coming weeks is simple. Can Ukraine's drone supremacy degrade Russian forces faster than Russia can replace them? We will be watching all of this for you. But it also brings out a huge lesson that we've seen in every conflict. The side that innovates fastest and can deploy those innovations forward and use them to best effect is the side that wrestles the initiative. And in my view, at the moment, the Ukraine has wrestled the initiative back from the Russians. However, the Russian inability to innovate when it comes to tactics on the ground, they're playing catch up with drone warfare, but when it comes to tactics and using personnel, it's meat grinder tactic after meat grinder tactic after meat grinder tactic. What is quite clear at the moment is Vladimir Putin does not see value in life from those Russians he is pushing to the front line. How long this will last, we don't know, but it's something that at some stage will come back and bite Putin and bite him hard. When we think of the war in Ukraine, we usually picture the brutal mud-soaked trenches of the Donbass or the grinding artillery duels in Zaporizhia. But right now, the spring of 2026, the most consequential front of this war isn't the front line at all, it's the deep battle. According to the latest April 2026 analysis from the Institute for the Study of War, Ukraine has fundamentally shifted its strategy. They are bypassing the Russian meat grinder and launching a relentless mid-range and deep strike campaign directly into the heart of the Russian homeland. Today, we're looking at how Kyiv is systematically dismantling Putin's war machine from the inside out. To understand what Ukraine is doing, you need to understand military doctrine, the deep battle, a concept originally perfected by the Soviets, ironically enough. The philosophy is simple. You don't just fight the enemy forces immediately in front of you, you strike simultaneously at their rear, destroying their logistics, their command centres and their supply lines, so the frontline forces wither on the vine. And Ukraine is currently executing this with devastating high-tech efficiency. General Alexander Syrskyi recently confirmed that Ukraine's newly formalised unmanned systems forces are flying an astonishing 11,000 combat missions a day. In March 2026 alone, they hit over 150,000 verified targets. This campaign has become so overwhelming that the Kremlin can no longer hide it. Former Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu made a rare, candid admission confirming that Ukrainian strikes against Russian infrastructure have increased almost fourfold, reaching over 23,000 strikes. When your enemy admits you're hitting them that hard, you know it's hurting. And we talk of the deep battle, and we talk of the deep battle as opposed to the close battle. If we want to look at the doctrine behind this, go to the very first episode of Battle Plans Exposed, and we talked of the interrelationship between the strategic level, the operational level, and the tactical level, and the overlaps there are between them. But what exactly is Ukraine targeting? The Institute for the Study of War assesses that Ukraine is currently focusing on two massive pillars of the Russian state: the defence industrial base, the factories building the weapons, and the oil economy funding them. Let's look at the strikes confirmed in the last few weeks of late March and early in April 2026. Number one, the drone factories. In the Rostov Oblast, Ukrainian strikes smashed the Atlant Aero production plant in Tagnarog. Why is this critical? This is the factory pumping out Molniya strike drones that Russia uses to terrorize Ukrainian infantry. Ukraine is killing the drones in their cribs before they ever reach the sky. So, strike two, the Black and Caspian Seas. Ukraine has proven nowhere is safe. They've struck the Krymyskia oil pumping station and the Shishkaris oil terminal in Novorossiysk, and even hit the LSP-1 and LSP-2 drilling platforms out in the northern Caspian Sea. The Baltic export halt, perhaps most significantly, a swarm of deep strikes near St. Petersburg targeted the Knef oil refinery and the Primorsk port, Russia's largest crude oil exporting hub on the Baltic Sea. By targeting these massive hydrocarbon hubs, Ukraine is temporarily halting significant portions of Russian oil exports. They're bleeding Putin's war chest dry. So what is the ultimate endgame of this deep battle? Well, it's about creating compounding effects. The ISW assesses that this strike campaign is directly interfering with Russia's ability to launch the spring-summer 2026 offensive. By destroying oil terminals, Russian tanks run out of fuel. By destroying the Atlant Aero plant, Russian infantry loses their air support. Russia is being forced to pull critical air defence systems away from the front to protect oil refineries deep inside their own borders. It is a massive strategic dilemma for the Russian General Staff. Ukraine is proving that modern wars aren't just won in the trenches, they're won by breaking the enemy's logistical spine hundreds or thousands of miles away. So that's all for Battle Plans Exposed this week. Remember, if you like what you see, please share it amongst your friends. Hit like down below. And if you've got any comments or any requests for what you want us to cover, please put them in the comments below. But thank you for watching. Till next time, goodbye.